Welcome to another episode of Gary Talks. In the past, I've done shows about writer-directors and talked about how sometimes they were a writer first and a director second, or a director first and a writer second. Today's subject, I would say, is more of a writer than a director. He wrote some movies for other people, and then also directed some of his own movies. So today I'm going to do a special top 10. A top 5 movies that he wrote for someone else to direct, and a top 5 movies that he directed of his own scripts. And my subject for the day is John Hughes.
Gary Talks Movies. Gary Talks Movies. Gary Talks Movies.
There are a lot of directors that when you say a decade, you immediately think of that director. And for the 80s, one of the top ones is John Hughes. Before we get to my top 5 John Hughes movies that he wrote and top 5 John Hughes movies that he directed, let's talk a little bit about John Hughes.
The reason I wrote Breakfast Club was because I wanted to do something that was very small. I figured if it didn't cost anything, they'd let me direct it. So I said, well, I'll make a movie in one room.
John Hughes was born in 1950 in Lansing, Michigan. He grew up in a middle-class family and attended Glenbrook North High School in Northbrook, Illinois, where he began his journey into storytelling and filmmaking. And of course, the Chicago area would always play a part in John Hughes movies. After dropping out of the University of Arizona, Hughes pursued a career in advertising in Chicago, but his knack for stories led him to a career in writing. Hughes started by penning humorous essays for National Lampoon magazine, which gained him recognition and laid the foundation for his future success in Hollywood. Hughes' breakthrough came with a screenplay for National Lampoon's Vacation in 1983, which was based on his essay for National Lampoon magazine called Vacation 58. It was a wildly successful comedy that showcased his talent for blending humor with genuine emotional depth. This success propelled him into the forefront of Hollywood screenwriting, leading to a string of hit films throughout the 1980s. John Hughes had an uncanny ability to tap into the hopes, fears, and dreams of teenagers, creating characters that resonated with audiences of all ages. His films often explored themes of identity, alienation, and the search for belonging, striking a chord with a generation grappling with the transition to adulthood. Tragically, John Hughes passed away on August 6, 2009 at the age of 59, leaving behind a rich legacy of films that cemented his status as one of the most influential filmmakers of his generation, ensuring that his work will be cherished for years to come. He wrote a lot of scripts for other directors, and we're going to start with the top 5 of those first. Coming in at number 5 is a movie that I kind of think is the forgotten John Hughes masterpiece. When you talk about John Hughes movies and his leading man, the romance, everything that a typical John Hughes 80s movie has, this one checks all the boxes, but I'd say it's one that people either haven't seen or they just forget that it's a John Hughes movie. And that movie is Some Kind of Wonderful. Some Kind of Wonderful hits a lot of the typical coming-of-age romantic comedy beats. There's a kind of dorky teenager who is in love with the super popular student, and because that's where his focus is, he doesn't realize that the perfect girl for him is his best friend. It's basically the exact same plot as Pretty in Pink. But in this one, the best friend actually gets the romance. I always preferred this to Pretty in Pink when I was growing up because of that, because I preferred the happier ending. Next up is a movie that I bet a lot of you think that John Hughes actually directed. If you look at any of the John Hughes box sets, it's always right there with the ones that he did. But the surprise is, he didn't direct this movie. But it's really, really good and is quintessential John Hughes. Coming in at number 4, Pretty in Pink. So remember how I said that Some Kind of Wonderful had almost the exact same plot as Pretty in Pink, except our hero and the best friend Dork end up together? Then why would I prefer Pretty in Pink other than the soundtrack, which is killer? I think it's because in real life, there was no way that Andy, played by Molly Ringwald, would end up with Ducky. When the coolest guy in school is interested in her, it would feel false for her to not pick him. Plus, come on, I can't be the only person who pretty much assumes that Ducky is gay and just didn't realize it yet, right? If Some Kind of Wonderful is a forgotten movie that John Hughes wrote, then this one is probably one that is just completely unknown. I don't know if many people even knew it existed. It did have a DVD release a long time ago, but is since out of print, and has never been released on Blu-ray. Yet, this is a movie I watch every single Thanksgiving. And I've met one of the stars of it, Ethan Embry, and I've talked to him numerous times about how much I love this movie, which always kind of blows him away because I figure he doesn't expect people to discuss this one. My number 3 favorite movie that John Hughes wrote, a Thanksgiving tradition in my house, Dutch. If Some Kind of Wonderful felt kind of like a recycled plot of Pretty in Pink, what would you say about Dutch? An unlikely duo who have nothing in common are on a road trip where everything goes wrong, and all they really want to do is get home to Chicago for Thanksgiving. It does remind me of another John Hughes movie. But Dutch is also a lot of fun thanks to the performance of Ed O'Neill as Dutch Dooley, a working-class stiff who is saddled with bringing his girlfriend's spoiled brat kid home for the holidays. Ethan Embry, credited as Ethan Randall at the time, plays his part great as his slow turn into a normal and nice kid works great for the big ending, and of course, Shooter McGavin himself is the asshole dad. You can't go wrong there. If you can track Dutch down anywhere, be sure to watch it this Thanksgiving. Speaking of traditions, this one is a holiday tradition for pretty much everybody. It's now up there with The Grinch and A Christmas Story. Everyone knows this movie. And I almost think that people don't think about it as a John Hughes screenplay when they think about things. They just think about Chevy Chase and the cast and Cousin Eddie and all the great quotes. This is a movie we watch every Christmas, and this is my wife's favorite movie of all time. My number 2 favorite John Hughes written movie, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
It's that time. Christmas time is here.
As I mentioned earlier, John Hughes introduced the world of the Griswold family in his short essay, Vacation 58. But I don't know if people realize he wrote a follow-up story called Vacation 59, which was the basis for Christmas Vacation. It's just a fun screenplay that moves at a spectacular pace, and he was able to take real-life things that happened to him and his family at the holidays and turn up the comedy, and it turned out to be this perennial holiday classic. I know you all have seen it. You've seen it multiple times. You guys can quote it. You probably have the t-shirts. So there really isn't anything else to say. It's a favorite of everyone's for a reason. So now we're here to my favorite John Hughes screenplay, and I think this actually is my favorite of anything that he did. If I were doing a top 10 list of things that John Hughes was associated with, this would be number 1. It's one of the funniest movies of all time. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of my most quoted movies of all time. My number 1 favorite John Hughes screenplay, National Lampoon's Vacation. While Christmas Vacation is a great movie, the original Vacation is completely flawless. From the introduction of the family truckster.
There she is. Where? Right here, the wagon. This is the automobile you should be using, the Wagon Queen family truckster. You think you hate it now, but wait till you drive it.
The screenplay was amazing. It was also a treat seeing St. Louis in the movie, though as anyone who was from St. Louis knows, there was no way Clark could be in East St. Louis when they get lost, as he was already across the Mississippi River and into St. Louis proper before they ever pulled off the freeway.
Roll 'em up.
As a guy who tries to go above and beyond for his family in every instance, and then flips out when it doesn't turn out the way I hoped, I can empathize with Clark W. Griswold and what he does once the moose told him out front that the park was closed. We used to go to Magic Mountain in Valencia, California all the time, and each time we drove there, I always thought that this was in fact Wally World. Vacation is without a doubt the best thing that John Hughes ever wrote. Now we're going to move to the movies that John Hughes directed. Now, I really don't think that John Hughes has much of a visual style. When we talked about Quentin Tarantino, We talked about how when you see a Tarantino movie, you know it's his because of the way it looks and the way that it's written. I think there are other directors, you see the movie, you know that's a David Lynch movie. But with John Hughes, I think it's one of the reasons why people often forget which ones he wrote and which ones he directed, because he didn't really have a directing style. But that's okay. He was still a very capable director, and I think a lot of times he directed his favorite screenplays. So we'll start with number 5. A movie that now has not aged well, based on a lot of the jokes, a lot of it. Even John Hughes himself said that he wished that he hadn't have written the way he did. But I love it. And it sums up the 80s very easily, which I can also say about almost every single one of these. But number 5 is 16 Candles. 16 Candles was John Hughes' directorial debut. And what really made the movie memorable, especially at the time, was normally you had your movies like Porky's about coming of age, and not only was this more wholesome-ish movie, but you actually were dealing with the coming of age of a teenage girl, which wasn't something that was seen a lot at the time, especially in a comedy. The other thing was that Hughes made this movie with respect to the teenagers as opposed to just making fun of them, and it made many of us who felt awkward in those times feel as if we were not alone. The crazy thing is, John Hughes wrote 16 Candles over a weekend after seeing Molly Ringwald's Headshot. A little bit of trivia is that Aragorn himself, Viggo Mortensen, was almost cast as Jake. That's kind of hard to imagine. Next up is a movie that I think a lot of you would probably have as number 1. It could be one of his most famous, I'm going to say it's in his top 2 most famous movies that he directed. But I never loved it quite as much as other people. As a matter of fact, I kind of found the lead annoying. But it is quintessential John Hughes, and I do enjoy the movie, and I do find it fun. Coming in at number 4, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a simple story. A bad boy, his girlfriend, and his sad sack best friend skip school for the day and have fun all over Chicago, while their principal tries to track them down. That's pretty much it. And like I said, I always found Ferris kind of a prick and felt bad for the way he treats his buddy Cameron. And there was something that bothered me about Ferris getting away with everything, and I'm not sure why. But it was on one of my multiple rewatches that something occurred to me. Ferris actually did this for Cameron. I think Ferris knew that Cameron was feeling suicidal, that he was having trouble with depression, that life was a struggle. So he planned this entire day, not for himself to have fun, but to show Cameron that life is worth living. We all know that Cameron grew throughout the movie, and finally at the end of it is able to stand up and talk back to his dad and stick up for himself. We all see that. That's really cool. But when you think about it, Ferris did this on purpose just to help his friend grow. That is the mark of a fantastic movie. Also, it's another one that Hughes wrote in no time, as he wrote the entire screenplay in a week, as there was a Writers Guild strike looming. As I've talked about before, I didn't have a VCR when I was younger because they were just too expensive. So we would go and rent a VCR for the weekend, rent movies, and watch them over and over and over. And number 3 on my John Hughes list here is one that I watched probably 8 or 9 times in one weekend. I would watch it, rewind it, watch it, rewind it, and go over and over again. And it was also very cool to me because in movies that I watched a lot as a kid, I never saw anybody with the name Gary. So that also made it cool. But I love this movie, it's fun, and it's one of my favorites. Coming in at number 3, Weird Science.
Weird Science. Elastic tubes and pots and pans, bits and pieces and magic from the handle making weird science.
If Ferris Bueller maybe has a deeper meaning between Ferris and Cameron, Weird Science is pretty much, what if we could make our dream girl with a computer? Gary and Wyatt are lovable nerds who get no respect, but once they create Lisa, she helps give them the confidence they need to stand up for themselves, fight off a crazy bunch of bikers, and get their true dream girls. It's just a fun movie, sometimes you don't have to be deeper than that. And we got Bill Paxton as Chet, who delivers one of my favorite bully lines of all time.
How about a nice, greasy pork sandwich served in a dirty ashtray?
Man, Chet sucked. I had mentioned how Ferris Bueller was probably a lot of your top John Hughes movie. But I think those of you that don't say Ferris Bueller will say this one. This one truly sums up the 80s. It's the most 80s of any movie he made. Which also means maybe it's a little dated now, but it is a pure time capsule of John Hughes movies. My number 2 favorite movie that he directed, The Breakfast Club.
Don't you forget about me.
Simply put, The Breakfast Club is iconic. And I know that people who grew up after the 80s probably don't see what the big fuss is about. A group of kids hang out in detention on a Saturday and make fun of each other and finally become friends. There's no real plot to speak of. They just sit around and talk. There's not a lot of action, and damn near the whole thing takes place in one room, the library. But it was all about the characters. By making each character an archetype, Hughes was able to say so much about the high school experience through the mouths of these characters. I was most certainly Brian, but I think all of us could see parts of all the characters in ourselves. Judd Nelson, of course, stole the movie as Bender, and I still quote pretty much each and every line he says. Maybe if they do a remake of this movie, it can just be 5 high school kids texting each other emojis. And now for number 1. We talked about holiday traditions, we talked about Dutch earlier, Christmas Vacation. This one has been a Thanksgiving movie for me as long as I can remember. It was one of the movies my dad and I watched together every year. We both loved it. Then after he died, I made a point that every year I have to watch this movie on Thanksgiving, no matter what else is going on. If we're traveling, if we're doing anything, I always make sure to have either a DVD copy, a download, or that it's streaming somewhere to watch. My favorite John Hughes movie of all time, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
You can talk about the pit, barbecue, the band was jumping, the people too, mess around.
It's really hard to put into words how much I love Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and why. For anyone who travels often for work, and especially over a holiday, there are so many things in this movie that you can relate to. But of course, like all great comedies, the moments are ratcheted up. Steve Martin and John Candy's chemistry on screen is nothing short of magical. Their dynamic is the heart and soul of the movie, and watching them bounce off each other is an absolute joy. The story itself is a hilarious adventure following an uptight businessman and a clumsy, lovable shower curtain ring salesman as they embark on a chaotic journey to get home for Thanksgiving. From missed flights to broken down trains and every mishap in between, the film is a roller coaster ride of laughter and mishaps. And also, never forget,
People train runs out of stub, Bill.
but what truly sets Planes, Trains, and Automobiles apart is its warmth and humanity. Beyond the laughs, it's a story about friendship, empathy, and the unexpected connections we make in life. Plus, the film is packed with memorable moments and quotable lines that have become ingrained in pop culture. From "those aren't pillows" to the iconic mess around sequence, there's no shortage of comedic gold to enjoy. In essence, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is more than just a comedy. It's a heartfelt journey filled with laughter, warmth, and life lessons. And it is my favorite John Hughes movie. You guys know the rules. I say this each and every week. What do you guys think? Do you agree with my selections? Do you disagree? Would you have ranked things differently? What if you just mixed them all together? What would be in your top 10? What would be your favorite? Vacation? Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? Ferris Bueller? Let me know. Shoot me a message, leave a comment wherever you watch this. Speaking of wherever you watch this, be sure to check out GaryTalks.tv. There I've got all the audio versions of the podcast, if that's what you prefer, as well as links to my Facebook page, my Twitter page, YouTube, everything Gary Talks. It's right there on Gary Talks TV. And be sure and check out the Facebook page of Gary Talks because I have some upcoming exclusive announcements, Some big things are in the future for Gary Talks, and I'm going to let people on Facebook know first, so if you really got to know, be sure and check that out. Next week, we're going to talk about music, as there's a huge documentary series now everybody's talking about, and it's about Bon Jovi. And Bon Jovi also has a new album coming out, so I figured let's look back at the albums of Bon Jovi. I'll see you then.
Gary Talks Movies. Gary Talks Movies. Gary Talks Movies.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.